Many years ago, while I was working on the road as a sales rep with a multinational, I had to pick up my new company car from the dealership on a cold, no, actually a very cold January morning. And as I was driving it off the lot, I heard a thud, and the car instantaneously got as cold inside as it was outside. The rear driver's window, side window, had fallen into the door. So back into the dealership I went. Surprised to see me again, they said, "Back so soon?" 15 minutes later, they had the car in the service bay. They took the door apart, and they realized that the window had never been put on the track. The only thing that was holding it into place was the friction on the piece of insulation that would guide the window up and down. Another day, shortly thereafter, we had not had any rain for a few days, even in the winter. It was a mild spell. And I was sitting there doing my paperwork, and it began to rain. But more strangely, it began to rain inside my car. So where was this water coming from? I looked around. I didn't have a sunroof or anything. Nothing was open. And as I looked up, I could see droplets, huge droplets of water coming along the window, the windshield, and dropping down right to where I was sitting, soaking the paper that I was working on. So I couldn't ignore this, because if I left it be, the car would be flooded and probably ruin the interior. So back to the dealership I went, which, thank God, was just a little ways down the road. Well, they were flabbergasted to see me again, 3 times now in less than a week. But because it was a new model car, they didn't think they'd be able to get a new windshield for several weeks. Well, I said, that won't do. This is how I make my living. I need a car to be on the road. So when they investigated, they called me the next day and said, "Good news. We can use the windshield that's in there because it was never installed properly." He said, "If you had stopped suddenly, the windshield probably would have flown out of the car." I said, "Well, that's a comfort." So anyway, they did fix it, and they were dismayed and in disbelief that it could have gotten through service checks with that happening. So it was shortly thereafter that I was putting the car in reverse, and the old cars, well, in the 80s, had the steering, the gear shifter on the column. So I put it in reverse, and it came off in my hand. So here I am with a running car, can't turn it off because it has to be in park to turn it off, and I'm asking people, can you go into the store there, it was a Shoppers Drug Mart, and call the dealership, I won't say who it was, they're not in business anymore, surprise, and see if you can get a tow truck for me. So anyway, somebody was kind enough, they were the Good Samaritan that day, and they went in, and lo and behold, a half hour later, with the engine running, my foot on the brake pedal, they did tow me away. So as you can probably think, that I'm getting pretty disappointed in this vehicle. I mean, I'm thinking about, well, this car should have been in good working order. I didn't have much faith in it anymore, and I certainly didn't have any trust in it. But then to add the last insult that week, I turned the car on, and this big orange check engine light came on. I thought, oh no, not another problem. Back to the dealership again. I was getting tired of sitting in a waiting room with 5-year-old magazines and coffee that resembled more tar than coffee. So here I am. And I thought, well, I got 2 options. The sensible thing would be to bring it back to the dealership, but I got an idea. I said, this car has been so much trouble lately, who knows what's going on with it. So I got a piece of black electrical tape, and I stuck it on over the light. So I thought, out of sight, out of mind. Everything's good. So I just left it that way for a long time until I really thought I should get this checked, because I didn't want to break down somewhere between nowhere and never in the middle of God knows where. And these were the days prior to cell phones, so you'd be sitting there waiting for a while for somebody to hopefully stop and give you at least a ride or get help for you. So you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with today's gospel? Well, a lot, actually, because in today's gospel, we hear the parable that the Lord tells to the apostles about the steward and the errors that the steward makes while he's left in charge as the master's gone to a wedding banquet. And I would assume that back in the day that these wedding banquets were not just an afternoon affair. They would go on for, as they do in the Middle East even today, for 3 days. So here's this slave that's put in charge. And what does he do? Well, first, he thinks that while the master is away, I can eat his food, I can drink his wine, and he can mistreat the slaves. He becomes to the point where he's raised himself up into the role of the master. But the one thing he did not have, first off, was that he didn't have the attributes of the master. He took it upon himself to change, to do it differently. And it went to his head. Sometimes people get a promotion or something, and people say their head's a bit swollen from being put into a place of authority. And he got into a place of self-importance. To him, it became all about me and what I want. And I think we can easily say that this is a familiar thing that happens in this day and age that we live here in the 21st century. We simply have to turn on the evening news to see how people treat each other today. Where is the love that Jesus had taught us and talked about? Where is the mercy that we are to give to each other? Sadly, humanity today has fallen into the trap where we think that we know better than God. Now, it's easy to become preoccupied at the things of this world. Is it a need or is it truly a want? And even to faithlessly divide our lives into compartments where we compartmentalize the sacred and the secular. We deceive ourselves whenever we think that we can give one part of our lives to God and then completely another part to our worldly pursuits. Now, the steward in the parable gets into his second error. Wasn't thinking that, okay, if I really mess up here, I have plenty of time to make things right before the master will return. Now, those of us that have lived a few years, we've come to realize that life is short. And with that, time seems to go by quicker, faster, particularly as we get older. Now, Jesus teaches us of 3 things. The first is that we have to action. We are to be there to help those in need, our brethren who are not as fortunate as many of us. We're there to share our riches to help them. Secondly, we must be vigilant. We must be prepared in living lives that are integrated by our faith. And thirdly, whatever our task in life is, we are to carry it out faithfully and responsibly in a spirit of service. Pope Francis said in his exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, that anyone who works in the name of Christ in service to others should do so with great joy and with great zeal, which means we have to be good stewards of the gifts that we have been bestowed with and entrusted with. So like the story of the car, we don't have a check engine light. We don't have that. And we don't have an engine either, but what we do have is the greatest gift that's been given to us by our Creator. And that is an eternal soul. And it is the most important thing in our lives forever and in this world. And we have to have the ability to examine our lives. We have to pray every day, and then with this examination, that St. Ignatius taught us in Discernment of Spirits, at the end of each day, to sit quietly and to ask ourselves, did I do a good job today? Did I treat the people I encountered with true love, respect, and dignity? Did I help them if I could help them and not just walk by? Did I try to be the best version of myself? And what can I do tomorrow to do better than what I did today? These are important questions. And that is probably the check light that we have to have each day of our lives as we travel through this journey in the triune life. I suppose that those are the choices we all have to make. We can either action them, or we can put a piece of tape over it and just ignore it and hope for the best. Now, we hear that we don't know when the Lord will return. The Lord himself, Jesus, did not know. Only the Father knows. He came, was born of a Virgin Mary. He was put to death, resurrected to life, and ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of his Father. We know these things and we believe these things, but we don't know when he will return. Now, there's a word called parousia. It's a Greek word, and translated roughly, it means presence. So God was here, he ascended into heaven, and he will return. But the connection here is what we will celebrate here at this Mass and every Mass in a few minutes. The real presence, the true presence of Jesus at the altar in the celebration of the Eucharist, the parousia. So he's still here with us in the Eucharist. So when we look at this gospel today about truth, about faith, and that we are accountable for everything we do, we must always be prepared because we know not when he will come. When preparing this homily, a thing that came back to me, it was something I remember as a child. Hide and seek. Ready or not, here I come. These may be the words that Jesus may say. I don't think so, but I like to think that maybe it is something that he would say when he comes again. And that is, ready or not, here I come.